I'm here in Fairview, Texas, where the local residents and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are in a fight over how tall the steeple on the temple that goes in this empty lot behind me will be. I'm here to see how that fight unfolds and maybe join in a little bit.
Come up and introduce yourself, please. Bye.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. In recent years, the church has found itself in fights with local municipalities over temples, more specifically over the height, location and lighting of temples in otherwise fairly rural small communities. The church has begun using some interesting arguments in these cases that have set my nonsense senses a-tingling. Fairview, Texas is one such town where the church is attempting to justify the height of the temple with reasoning unfamiliar even to most members of the church, that being that the height of the steeple is part of our religious observance. Knowing that these justifications seem to be ill-justified by LDS teachings,
who cares what the size is if you have access to the same covenants and ordinances?
Just over a month ago, one of the residents of Fairview, who will be directly impacted by the proposed temple, reached out and asked if I would like to come and speak to the town council to try and bring clarity to the church's position. Of course I said yes, and so I packed my bags, caught a train, hopped on a plane. So my flight's been delayed. Only 2 hours, but great start to the trip. Anyway, once the plane decided to show up, I climbed aboard, took my seat, and we headed for the Lone Star State. After totally not getting cavity searched by US border security, and only 3 hours later than planned, I arrived in Dallas and made my way to Fairview. But why Fairview? Why are the church trying to build a temple there, and why do the residents have a problem with it? Well, the church originally announced the Prosper, Texas temple on the 2nd of October 2022.
Prosper, Texas.
Then on the 4th of December 2023, the church announced that the name had been changed, and depending on how you read the announcement, the location had been changed too. Now that the church had finally found a site and bought the land, they began to inform the local residents. The church communications director, Melissa McKinney, sent this letter out to residents, and two key things stand out. First, she states that the project is consistent with city regulations, which it isn't, because the church is having to ask for a variance from the regular RE1 zoning. And second, she states that this building is 2 stories tall. And what's wrong with that?
Well, the proposed temple in this residential area would be 65 feet tall at the roof and 173 feet tall and 8 inches at the spire.
That would make it by far the tallest religious building in town, and taller than both the town hall and the water towers. Now, I want to dispel a myth that's been peddled by both the church in their original application and the mayor of neighbouring McKinney in his letter to the Fairview Town Council.
That being that the building behind me, the Creekwood United Methodist Church, received an exemption in 2006 for a 154-foot tall bell tower. As you can tell by the absence of a whopping great bell tower behind me, that exemption was never actually granted.
What happened was the United Methodist Church was allowed to build their church, but not the bell tower. The council let the majority of the construction go ahead and left the matter of the bell tower to be resolved at a later time. This works because the tower wasn't integrated within the structure of the church, unlike the steeple of the proposed temple. This means construction could go ahead while the tower height could be left to another time. Now, there are some at the town council meeting from the church saying that the Creekwood United Methodist Church's application for an exemption for the bell tower was actually granted.
My only question is if there were, quote, no problems with the tower, and if it, quote, would not be a problem for a main building height of 79 feet.
Dan, go ahead and finish up.
Why does our council have an issue with this building?
However, regardless of who said what to who, the conditional use permit that was granted in 2006 for the Creekwood UMC came with the following condition. The location and footprint of the bell tower is approved, with the height, noise and sound system of the bell tower to be addressed at a later time in the development process before the Planning and Zoning Commission. Also, the Creekwood UMC is vastly different to the proposed temple. The main building is only 38 feet high, 3 feet taller than zoning, whereas the LDS temple is 65 feet tall at the roof. This represents a building 28 feet taller and therefore a much larger building mass before we even get to the steeple. Then, when we get to the bell tower, the Creekwood UMC asked for a 154-foot bell tower, as opposed to a 173-foot and 8-inch steeple that the proposed temple is asking for. The LDS temple would require a steeple 20 feet taller than the Creekwood bell tower. So even if the bell tower had been approved and ultimately built, it still wouldn't be a precedent on which the church could rely, because they are asking for something taller than the bell tower, not the same height or shorter. However, ultimately, this is all irrelevant, because the Creekwood bell tower was never built.
It wasn't until 11 years later that they were allowed to build the much more modest 51-foot tall tower that we see right there.
What that means, of course, is that this LDS meeting house on Stacy Road is the tallest religious building in Fairview. It's 68 feet tall, almost twice the normal residential maximum of 35 feet. In my opinion, that makes it difficult for the church to argue that they are being discriminated against, when they already have the tallest extant religious building in town. And away from the overall height, let's go back to that 65-foot roof height for the temple, and what that does for the overall visual mass of the building. By launching the drone from the garden of a neighbouring property, we can see just how close the proposed temple will be, and with a 65-foot roof height, the sheer size of the building that will overshadow this property. And from this angle, if you put the roof of the temple just below the tip of the current LDS Meeting House spire, you'll get a sense of just how massive this building would be. But none of these facts and concerns, along with several more raised by local residents, seem to have stopped the church threatening that the town could face legal action.
DOJ, the Department of Justice, sent out a memo to all the cities, counties, and states in this nation to say, you need to recognize the federal statute. The Department of Justice is currently active investigating lawsuits and investigations and bringing lawsuits to enforce the laws. So this town, if it's found to violate, will need to comply or face enforcement rules from the Department of Justice. Under the United States Constitution and the federal state statute, the city can't substantially burden the free exercise of religion. You can't burden the free exercise of religion.
As you heard in the clip, many residents felt that that was a threat. And so as a result, the tension between the church and those residents is very high. And what did the church think would help? Asking members to show up en masse from out of area to the town council meeting. They asked them all to wear white shirts and to be present to show their support for the temple. Some members were told to stand down and refrain from coming to the meeting. And this order went out just as we learned that the church had asked for a continuance in their private meeting with the town council beforehand. And some have suggested that it might be because lawyers came up, shook my hand, recognized me as Nemo the Mormon, and panicked a little bit. Still, despite the stand-down order, the church says that 2,500 members showed up wearing white. And that was on top of the 13,500 emails that the planning director received at the direction of church leaders. But despite being outnumbered, the local residents stood up bravely and eloquently, bringing well-researched arguments to the table. I also want to highlight a particularly brave local church member who got up and spoke out against the way the church is representing itself in this issue.
I've worshipped in Latter-day Saint temples for over 15 years. I volunteered 2 of those years abroad in full-time proselyting missionary service. I hold the current temple recommend, which is a document that attests that the Fairview meets the requirements and is considered worthy to enter the temple. It's presented in skin and allowing to be admission to operational temples. My fellow members here are well-intended. You're good folks. Please give us grace. Thousands have emailed and hundreds attend today in response to misleading letters from our leaders that the quote growing opposition does not want us to have a temple. It's clear to all who have involved themselves that the people in government of Fairview have taken no such posture. The only thing left in the way of this temple is church leadership's insistence on details such as the height of the spire. There's no tenet of the faith, no principle, no doctrinal basis for the height of the temple spire. In the temple, Latter-day Saints make covenants and carry out ordinances of salvation such as baptisms for the dead, the initiatory, the endowing, sealing families, and all of these also on behalf of deceased ancestors. The steeple and spire are not related to the ordinances performed in the temple or their associated covenants. Church leadership uses the mites of the widows to hire lawyers and attorneys to do battle over lighting and architecture in cities across the country and the globe, sowing enmity between members of the church and their neighbors and calling it persecution. Now it's happening right here. This will continue until awareness spreads and the people dissent. You, Mayor, and the Council are in a position to ease the strife brought to Fairview and neighboring areas. Those who commission these projects draw near me with their mouth and with their lips who harm me, but have removed their hearts far from me. They speak softly and carry a big stick. I've never known Americans, certainly not Texans, to lie down just because someone carries a big stick. As for myself, do I feel the consequences of speaking here today? Yes. But action in spite of courage, action in spite of fear is courage. Let's be courageous.
I did see this member being spoken to by an Area 70 afterwards, and I hope that excommunication is not in their future. And now, hoping that I've managed to make clear to you the issues at play, here are my remarks to the Fairview Town Council.
I travel here from Oxford, England. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I am a graduate of the Church's seminary programme. I am a returned missionary, and I'm also the UK's leading commentator on the Church. There are 3 simple points that need to be made here, particularly in response to the claim being made that the height of the steeple is part of our religious observance. 1, the temples do not need a steeple. 2, the steeple does not have to be a certain height. And 3, architectural design is secondary to the temple's primary purpose. The Church currently has 199 temples that are either operating, being refurbished, or awaiting dedication. All of these are equal in their value to Latter-day Saint worship. They all provide access to the same covenants and ordinances. And there are several prominent examples of temples with no steeple at all. Mesa, Arizona, Carson, Alberta, Lake, Hawaii, and most recently, Paris, France. Of those temples that do have a steeple, the shortest is just 54 feet in Freiburg, Germany. In fact, almost 90% of the Church's temples have a steeple shorter than what is being proposed here in Fairview at 173 feet and 8 inches. It is eminently acceptable to the Church in almost 90% of cases to have a steeple shorter than what they're asking for here at Fairview. The shortest temple the Church has ever built is the Paris, France temple at just 42 feet tall with no spire, no steeple. Yet it has a square footage of 44,175 square feet, the same as the proposed temple in Fairview. Steeple height, therefore, cannot be argued by square footage. And speaking of the Paris, France temple, presiding bishop of the Church, Gerard Corsay, said, "There are a number of constraints that we have, the code that we have to respect. But in the end, it is only good because it makes for a temple that everybody accepts and recognizes as theirs." The presiding bishop of the LDS Church publicly declared that respect for planning code and constraints is a good thing because it makes for a temple that everybody accepts and recognizes as their own. Where is that attitude here? Furthering Bishop Corsay's point, the Church has said a temple's design, both internal and external, is secondary to its primary purpose. The prophet and president of the Church, Russell Nelson, said more plainly in 2022, it's not the location, it's not the architecture, it's the ordinances inside. I've heard many claims that the steeple variance is required by LDS beliefs, and that's simply not the case. The president of the Church has said otherwise. The actions of local leaders are not in harmony with the teachings of the prophet of the Church. And I don't know why they're ignoring the plain teachings of the president of the Church. What I can say categorically is, as a member of this Church, steeple height has never mattered. I have known throughout my entire membership of the Church that some temples have steeples and others do not. I think LDS Apostle David A. Bednar summarized it best in April 2023, just last year, when he said regarding temples, who cares what size it is if you have access to the same covenants and ordinances? Thank you very much.
I told you in a recent video I was planning to get out of the studio more, and I hope you've enjoyed this. If you did and want me to continue to travel about, please consider becoming a monthly supporter at the donor box link in the description. $10, $15, $20 a month all adds up and allows me to continue to do this kind of thing full time. But it's not all about the money. Hitting the like button is also incredibly helpful. Now, the meeting ended up with the church being granted a continuance to come back in 2 months with revised plans. Both the mayor and another member of the council made it clear that if the plans don't change sufficiently, the church will be denied.
Personally, I don't think that waiting a couple of months, well, the only thing that it will change is either the leadership of the LDS that's here that has an opportunity to change their presentation and come within our ordinances. That's the only thing that can happen. If it doesn't happen, my guess is it'll be denied.
Anyway, so I'm still emotive. I think we need to continue this and let them, let the LDS folks go back home, let them have a shot at meeting our requirements. As Mr. Custer said, I believe that if they don't, then we're rejected the next time.
If that happens, I'm confident the church will seek to bring about legal action against the town of Fairview, like they did in Cody, Wyoming. So to find out if that does happen, be sure to subscribe.